Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The decision was not ceremonial, temporary, or open to negotiation. Prince William had reached the point where hesitation itself carried a cost, and when the final instruction was issued, Camilla discovered that the palace world she had fought decades to enter could close around her just as quickly. One order removed the last privileges tying her personally to the royal household. For William, it was protection. For Camilla, it felt like exile. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move when the written instruction reached her during a private morning briefing. She read the final paragraph once, then again, as if the words might change under pressure. They did not. The order was clear. William had authorized the closure of her personal palace office, withdrawn her access privileges to residences controlled by his household, and removed the staff members assigned to support her position. A royal household is the working network of offices, staff, schedules, residences, and private administration supporting senior members of the family. This was not symbolism. It touched the machinery of daily power. William felt no victory as he approved it. Alone before the decision went forward, the prince understood exactly how the move would be read. To outsiders, it could look like a family rupture. To Camilla, it would feel like a rejection, after years spent securing her place beside Charles. Yet the future king had come to believe that blurred authority carried a greater danger. His household, Catherine's position, and the future lives of their children could not remain tied to arrangements created under an earlier reign. The silence around the decision hid something even more unsettling. William had not acted in anger after one heated exchange. The order had been prepared quietly over several weeks, with access lists reviewed, staff assignments examined, private scheduling channels separated, and household liaison privileges marked for withdrawal. By the time Camilla saw the pages, the choice had already hardened into policy. She asked her aide whether any direct route remained. The answer was painfully simple: no. Camilla finally set the papers down. The confidence that had carried her through decades of public hostility seemed to disappear for a moment, replaced by something quieter and far more personal. She had not merely lost an office. She had lost the last practical foothold connecting her influence to William's palace structure. And that raised the question no order could answer. Why had he decided the relationship could no longer be repaired? The answer led backward, toward an old wound neither of them had ever truly escaped. This was never simply a battle over rooms, staff, or palace privileges. Behind William's decision stood a childhood defined by public fracture. A father he loved, a mother he lost, and a woman whose place in that history could never be emotionally neutral. Behind Camilla stood decades spent surviving hostility, rebuilding her standing, and believing acceptance had finally been secured. Both understood the institution. Neither could escape what the institution had once done to their family. William carried that history into every decision, even when he tried to separate emotion from duty. As the future sovereign, he knew the crown, the institution of monarchy and the authority that passes from one monarch to the next, could not be protected by sentiment alone. Yet he was still Charles's son, and that made every boundary harder. The prince understood that his father had spent years trying to hold together a family, already shaped by loss, resentment, and public judgment. Cutting Camilla away from his household, therefore, meant more than changing procedure. It meant rejecting part of the unity the king had hoped would survive him. Catherine heard the conflict in his voice during a quiet, private conversation. William admitted that removing access was not the part that troubled him most. What stayed with him was the knowledge that Charles had once imagined a future in which his wife and his eldest son would remain connected after his reign. The princess listened without interrupting, as he explained that protecting their own household now required choices his father might experience as betrayal. She understood why he felt trapped between loyalty and responsibility, but she also knew he had already moved too far to pretend the old arrangement still worked. Camilla felt the same rupture from the opposite side. During a private conversation with a longtime confidant, she insisted that public anger no longer frightened her. She had survived years of criticism before, but when she admitted that she never expected to feel pushed away from within the family itself, her voice faltered. Palace recognition had become proof that her long struggle for acceptance was finally over. Now that certainty was disappearing, and she could no longer convince herself that this was simply another temporary disagreement with William. The deeper problem was influence. William had grown increasingly uneasy about requests, conversations, and interventions reaching his staff through channels associated with Camilla. He did not object to courtesy or ceremonial respect. He objected to blurred authority. The prince had started building a future royal structure in which Catherine, their children, and his own advisors answered to clearly defined lines of responsibility. Camilla finally understood what that meant. William was not waiting for tensions to cool. He was designing a future in which her influence stopped at the edge of his reign. And one private encounter had convinced him that such a boundary was no longer optional. The final order had looked sudden, but its true beginning lay in the moment William decided someone had crossed a line that could never again be ignored. Long before Camilla saw her palace privileges disappear, there had been a dinner that almost nobody outside the family knew mattered. No announcement followed it, no statement was issued. Yet inside one private room, a disagreement over William's household, Catherine's role, and who had the right to intervene became something far more dangerous. Voices stayed controlled. Nobody shouted. But by the time William pushed back his chair, one certainty had hardened inside him. The old arrangement could not survive forever. William had been taking greater control over the machinery surrounding his family for months. His household, the staff, finances, scheduling, advisors, and offices serving his immediate royal duties, was becoming increasingly independent as his responsibilities grew. The prince wanted clearer lines around Catherine, their children, and the priorities that would shape his future reign. Camilla, however, had become used to the more flexible boundaries surrounding Charles, where long personal relationships sometimes carried influence beyond formal job descriptions. What she saw as experience, William increasingly saw as interference. Camilla felt that distance growing and resented what it seemed to imply. She believed matters affecting the wider family should still allow her a voice, especially after years spent beside the king. William saw the same interventions differently. Each request reaching his staff, each suggestion touching Catherine's role, and each attempt to influence decisions concerning his children made him more protective. Charles felt the pressure from both sides. In separate private conversations, the monarch urged his wife and his son not to let disagreement harden into permanent division. Neither wanted to hurt him. Neither was prepared to surrender. The breaking point came during a private dinner at Windsor. Camilla challenged William over his decision to remove one of her preferred advisors from a joint royal planning meeting. A royal planning meeting is simply a closed discussion where senior households coordinate future duties, appearances, and responsibilities. She demanded that the advisor be reinstated, arguing that Charles had always allowed her a voice in such matters. William listened without interrupting. Then he refused. His answer was calm, but devastating. His household would no longer be governed by arrangements created under his father's reign. Camilla understood the meaning immediately. She did not continue the argument. She left, knowing the dispute had moved beyond one advisor, while William remained behind with Charles. The prince told his father that future access would depend on defined responsibility, not personal history. The king understood what his son was really saying. Sooner or later, those boundaries would reach Camilla herself. Weeks later, William acted on that promise. The Windsor dinner had created the fracture. The final palace order would force them to stand face to face inside it. Camilla did not intend to accept the decision through intermediaries. Within hours of learning what William had ordered, she demanded to hear the reasoning from him directly. When they finally faced one another, there were no cameras, no public smiles, and no senior courtiers to soften the language. For years they had survived by leaving certain things unsaid. Now those protections disappeared, and William was about to tell her that the decision would not be reversed. Camilla carried the order into the meeting and placed it down between them. She asked William whether he truly intended to remove every remaining connection she possessed to his household. The prince did not answer quickly. A royal household, in practical terms, is the staff, offices, advisors, schedules, residences, and private administration serving a senior royal. What she had lost was not one symbolic privilege. It was the network that allowed her to remain connected to his future court. William chose his words carefully, because he knew anger would make the moment easier to dismiss. He told Camilla that he was not erasing her history, questioning her place beside Charles, or pretending the past could be rewritten. The prince was drawing a boundary between that history and the authority surrounding his own family. He wanted Catherine and the children protected from the kind of blurred loyalties that had already created years of tension. Camilla heard the distinction, but it did not soften the blow. To her, separation still felt like rejection. Camilla then pushed into the one subject neither of them could discuss without reopening old pain. She asked whether Diana's memory was really driving the decision. William refused to take the bait. He would not turn the conversation into a trial of the past. Instead, the future king told her that Catherine and his children would never be forced to live inside a household where influence moved through private relationships rather than clear responsibility. That answer hurt more than an accusation, because it showed how far ahead he was already thinking. Camilla made one final attempt. She asked William to delay the changes until Charles could intervene and give both sides time to reconsider. The prince closed the folder in front of him. His response was short, controlled, and final. "This is my decision." Camilla understood immediately that there would be no second meeting, no softened version, and no quiet restoration once tempers cooled. William had already moved beyond negotiation. He was behaving like a man preparing the structure of his own reign, not like a son waiting for his father to settle a family dispute. What had looked painfully personal was now colliding with something much larger, the real household authority William already possessed to make the decision stand. Palaces create an illusion that every royal privilege lasts forever. It does not. Offices exist because somebody authorizes them. Staff remain because somebody pays them. Access continues because somebody approves it. Behind William's confrontation with Camilla stood a colder reality. The future king had already acquired substantial authority over the household structure surrounding him. What devastated Camilla was not merely that he wanted distance. It was discovering that the mechanisms existed for him to enforce that distance without asking her permission. William understood exactly where that power came from. His household operated through its own staff, security rules, private offices, financial controls, and residence access systems, all separate from Camilla's personal position beside Charles. Security protocols are the rules deciding who may enter protected royal spaces, receive confidential information, or move through restricted areas. As the prince took on greater responsibility, he also gained greater control over who entered his family's internal planning, and who could use the private channels attached to his office. Charles felt the weight of that distinction when the implementation summary reached him. He read it in silence, removed his glasses, and placed them beside the file. The king could see that William had not acted carelessly. Every step had been limited to the future king's own sphere. That made the situation harder, not easier. He wanted to protect Camilla from humiliation, yet he also knew his son had the right to define the boundaries around Catherine, the children, and the court he would one day inherit. William refused to soften the order when his father raised the possibility privately. The prince told Charles that one exception would destroy the entire purpose of the boundary. If Camilla could regain access because the decision caused emotional pain, then every future rule could be challenged through family pressure. He was not willing to build his household that way. The king heard the firmness in his son's answer and realized that this was no passing dispute. William had already moved from intention to enforcement. The machinery was moving fast. Staff reassignment notices had been approved. Secure access lists had been rewritten. Camilla's independent liaison route into William's office had been terminated. A liaison route is simply a direct channel allowing one royal household to communicate with another without going through ordinary scheduling layers. Once that route disappeared, she could no longer reach his team with the ease she had once taken for granted. Charles then noticed something crucial. William had deliberately left honors, ceremonial dignity, and Camilla's public standing untouched. The prince was removing influence, not attacking his father's wife. That distinction protected the king while making the separation permanent. And the next morning, Camilla would discover what permanence actually felt like when the palace began operating as though her access had never existed. The deepest shock did not arrive during the argument with William. It came afterward, in small humiliations that required no raised voices. A familiar extension no longer connected. A member of staff had been reassigned. A meeting appeared on the royal schedule without her office receiving the briefing. Each change was minor by itself. Together they delivered an unmistakable message. Camilla had not merely lost a confrontation. The palace had already begun reorganizing itself around the reality of her exclusion. Camilla discovered how quickly an order could become ordinary life. Communications privileges changed first, then designated staff disappeared from her office, and invitations connected specifically to William's household stopped arriving. Palace employees remained polite, but they had been instructed to follow the new boundaries without exception. Those boundaries were operational rules, defining who could contact, brief, or influence another royal household. That distinction mattered because it transformed what had begun as a family argument into a system that no longer depended on anyone's mood. Camilla tested that reality herself. She asked an aide to contact William's private secretary through the direct channel her office had used before. The aide hesitated, then explained that the route had been discontinued. She turned away, lowered herself into a chair, and remained silent for several seconds. Then she gave one instruction: do not try again. The queen consort understood that forcing another request through ordinary channels would only make the rejection more visible. Charles found her quieter than usual when he came to see her later. Camilla told him she had endured years of being condemned by strangers, mocked in headlines, and treated as though she would never belong. But this felt different. She had never imagined feeling unwelcome inside the royal family itself. The king listened without interrupting, because he understood why the wound ran deeper. Public criticism could be dismissed as noise. Rejection from William carried the weight of family, succession, and everything that would come after his own reign. The consequences kept spreading. Camilla learned that several future engagements she had expected to help shape would now move forward without input from her office. William's restructuring was clearly not about one quarrel. It was about long-term governance, the way future royal work would be organized and controlled. Catherine saw the danger of that firmness becoming cruelty. In a private conversation, she urged William not to humiliate Camilla publicly. The prince agreed. He wanted separation, not revenge, and that difference mattered. Camilla had lost access, influence, and certainty. But before bitterness became permanent, Charles asked his son for one private conversation that would change the emotional direction of everything. There were no private secretaries in the room, no lawyers, no household officials, just a father and a son carrying decades of history neither could rewrite. Charles did not summon William as a monarch issuing instructions. He asked to speak as a husband who had seen his wife devastated, and as a father who understood why his eldest son had built walls around his own family. For the first time, the argument stopped being about authority and became about mercy. Charles wanted the conversation stripped of ceremony because he knew formality would only make William more defensive. A private secretary is the senior aide who helps organize a royal's official work, correspondence, and daily decisions. But none was invited into this exchange. The king understood that if he approached his son through palace machinery, the meeting would feel like pressure from the crown. He wanted something different. He wanted William to hear him as a father before hearing him as a monarch. William arrived prepared to defend every part of the order. He expected arguments about access, staff, and whether Camilla had been treated too harshly. Instead, Charles told him that his wife felt she had lost more than influence. She felt she had lost belonging. The prince listened, then answered that belonging could not come with authority over Catherine, the children, or his household. He was willing to protect dignity. He was not willing to surrender control. Charles accepted that distinction, but he pushed on one point. He asked William not to let a necessary boundary become punishment. The king reminded him that family dignity still mattered, even where trust had broken down. William did not reject that plea. In fact, he revealed that he had already made the same distinction privately. Camilla would still have personal contact with Charles, invitations to genuine family occasions, and full courtesy from his household. What she would not regain was operational influence. William's explanation changed the emotional weight of the decision. The prince was not trying to erase Camilla from his father's life or humiliate her in front of the family. He was defining where her authority ended. That mattered because it gave Charles room to accept the outcome without turning the dispute into a direct clash between king and heir. Charles finally understood that the boundary would stand. He did not like what it had cost Camilla, but he could see that his son had chosen separation over revenge. The king left the conversation wounded, yet calmer. Inside the family, a fragile understanding had formed. Outside it, however, one headline was about to turn that private boundary into a national judgment on Camilla's place in royal history. By the next morning, the palace could no longer control what the decision meant to everyone else. Commentators called it succession planning. Critics called it cruelty. Others saw something more symbolic. William drawing a final line between his father's court and the monarchy he intended to inherit. But one newspaper front page captured the mood with brutal simplicity. Above photographs of William and Camilla appeared three enormous words: the final cut. Suddenly, a private household decision had become a public referendum on belonging. William watched the coverage spread beyond palace walls. National broadcasters framed the decision as evidence that he was already reshaping the future royal structure around Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Succession planning, in simple terms, means preparing the people, roles, and responsibilities that will support the monarchy when leadership passes to the next sovereign. The prince understood why the story had exploded. His decision no longer looked like an internal disagreement. It looked like a preview of the court he intended to build. Camilla saw the front page during breakfast and said nothing at first. She folded the newspaper inward, hiding the headline, then asked that no more coverage be brought into the room. Palace communications stressed that she remained treated with dignity as Charles's wife, yet they did not deny that access to William's household had changed. That silence carried its own message. The queen consort could still stand beside the king, but the public now understood that her influence would not automatically follow her into the next reign. William heard another argument taking shape on television. Some commentators accused him of being too harsh, while others praised him for drawing a line around his family. Catherine asked privately whether the noise changed anything. The prince answered that reversing course because of headlines would make every difficult boundary meaningless. She understood his point, but she also reminded him that firmness did not require humiliation. The public reaction became impossible to simplify. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered as broadcasters reported live from the gates. One supporter held a handwritten sign reading, "William's future, William's rules." Nearby, another voice argued that Camilla deserved respect after years of service beside Charles. The disagreement captured something the palace itself had begun to recognize. This was not a story with one villain and one victor. Camilla noticed that shift too. Public opinion was not uniformly hostile toward her, and William saw that triumphalism would only deepen the wound. The battle over access was effectively over. What remained was harder. The country had chosen its interpretations, but the final verdict would not come from a headline. It would come when William and Camilla faced each other again, after there was nothing left to fight over. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no apology that erased the past, no sudden embrace capable of turning decades of complicated history into something simple. The resolution was harder and more believable than that. William kept the boundaries he had imposed. Camilla stopped fighting them. Charles accepted that the court of his son could not be governed according to the relationships of his own reign. And from that painful acceptance came something the palace had lacked throughout the crisis: clarity. Camilla's position was now defined with painful precision. Her personal palace office within William's sphere remained closed. The exclusive staff support attached to it was not restored, and the privileged operational access she once used was permanently withdrawn. Operational access means the practical ability to reach staff, schedules, private planning channels, and internal household decisions. She still received courtesy as Charles's wife, and she remained welcome at genuine family occasions. But respect no longer meant influence, and that distinction changed everything. William proved that distinction at a later family gathering. Before dinner, he approached Camilla and asked quietly after Charles. She answered him, then paused before saying, "I understand the line now." The prince looked at her for a moment and replied, "That was all I needed." Nothing more was required. The queen consort did not recover what she had lost, but she recovered control over how she responded to it. Instead of challenging the boundary again, she accepted that her strongest loyalty now belonged beside the king, not inside the structure of the next reign. Charles reached his own conclusion slowly. He had wanted to protect Camilla from feeling cast aside, yet he could no longer ask William to recreate the same arrangements simply to preserve peace. The monarch understood that allowing his heir genuine autonomy was part of preparing the crown for what came next. William, meanwhile, had finally separated the future of Catherine and the children from conflicts inherited from the past. His decision was not about erasing Diana, nor about humiliating his stepmother. It was about refusing to let old wounds govern a new court. Camilla had been left reeling because the order ended an era she believed had become permanent. William emerged harder but clearer. Charles remained wounded, yet accepting. The family relationship survived, but its power structure did not. That was the real meaning of the final cut. There would be no hidden reversal, and no second confrontation. William's boundary stood. Camilla accepted the limits of her place in the future court, and the monarchy moved forward, with one painful chapter finally closed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.